The National Nuclear Regulator announcing yesterday that Eskom can run Koeberg's Unit 1 for another 20 years. The regulator found that Eskom met the required safety standards to continue operating that unit, but a decision will be made at a later stage on whether Unit 2 will continue to operate. That license expires in November 2025. Clyde Mallinson, energy analyst, joins me now on the line. Your thoughts? Eskom has been at pains over the for the last 2 years that it is upgrading and refurbishing Koeberg's Unit 1 as it applies for that extension, which now has been granted. But your thoughts on this extension, Clyde? Good morning.
Good morning, Lester. Good to be speaking again on CapeTalk. Okay, so let's just get a couple of things in line. First of all, the National Nuclear Regulator, unlike the National Energy Regulator, has only one task. Their task isn't to regulate prices of electricity. Their task isn't to advocate for any form of electricity. Their task is simply to ensure the safety of nuclear generation. So that's the role of the nuclear regulator. Now, if you think of motor vehicles, any motor vehicle company that wants to get a safety accreditation can't accredit it itself. It has to go to a third-party testing kind of facility, like with crash test dummies, if you know what I mean. And they then get a rating, a safety rating. And the safety rating is always given by an independent, third-party kind of institution that looks intensively at the safety. So that's the first point to make, is that the role is entirely that of safety. And it needs oversight from, because you can't crash test dummy nuclear plants, you have to look at what's happened globally to nuclear plants to get occasions when there's been problems. And we all know that there have been some problems that are well recorded. 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, etc. Those are the sort of crashes that happen that you then put to the test. And when those crashes happen, they then improve the safety of nuclear plants. So they put means in place that ensure that those things won't happen again. And when the International Atomic Agency came and looked at Koeberg, they listed 14 items that needed to be dealt with urgently if they wanted to continue to operate it safely. And Eskom didn't make, or the nuclear regulator didn't make that information publicly available for good reason. So eventually, when there was a PIA Act and they made that information available, half of it was redacted. So we'd kind of say there's a big, and then it would be blacked out. And eventually, when we got a copy of what the problems really were, we saw that there were I think there were 14 things that were very, very serious. So I just wanted to get that into perspective. The NNA, the job is for safety and only for safety.
What then is the operational safety record of the Koeberg nuclear power plant, besides the Alec Irwin bolt in the generator incident? There's not a major incident that I can recall offhand. Maybe you have better knowledge?
Okay, remember, when you have major nuclear plants aren't like cars. So as I said, you can't do crash test dummies. They're more like aircraft. Everything's fine until they crash, basically. And then it's mayhem, essentially. So you can have the safest car in the world, and I'm not suggesting Koeberg is the safest power plant in the world. Remember, it was built in the 80s, so sticking with the car analogy, it would have incredibly good seat belts, perhaps, or it would have seat belts put in the car, but they wouldn't be inertia real seat belts because they hadn't been invented in the 80s. And they also wouldn't have airbags. So you cannot take a 1980s nuclear plant and bring it up to current safety standards. You just can't do it. You can make sure that all the safety standards that were in place at the time it was built are in good working order, but you can't suddenly put airbags into a car that doesn't have space to fit airbags. So yes, Koeberg hasn't, had a meltdown, thank goodness. It's operated relatively safely. But then, irrespective of how safe a plant is, you can have a very safe motor vehicle, but if the driver of that motor vehicle is reckless, they can still have a fatal accident. And I don't know if you recall when they were busy doing the refurbishment. Well, first of all, when they started off with Unit 2, they couldn't carry on because they'd forgotten to build a containment building where the old steam generator would be contained when it was taken out. So for 9 months, they fiddled about and then went to Unit 1, which is part of the reason there's been such a delay. But the point I'm trying to make is you may vaguely remember that some guy with an angle grinder cut off a valve that he thought was connected to Unit 2 that they were busy working on. And it was actually connected to Unit 1. And I'm not quite sure what the consequences of that were, other than I know they had to shut down Koeberg for a day or two to remedy it. So I bring to light the fact that it's not just the safety of the plant, but it's how it's operated.
Can the South African grid operate functionally? Is there enough capacity even without Unit 1 has now been approved to run till 2044. We now wait for next year on the decision on Unit 2. Eskom says Koeberg provides about 5% of South Africa's electricity capacity. Can the South African economy survive without a Koeberg nuclear power plant?
This takes us now out of the safety realm into the economic realm. And I don't think Eskom could have chosen a worse time in history to undertake the upgrade of Koeberg, because throughout the upgrade process, apart from the last 108 days, we've had load shedding every day during the refurbishment of Koeberg. And while one unit of Koeberg has been offline, we can unequivocally say that we had an extra stage of load shedding throughout the whole of 2023 and most of 2022 and a big chunk of 2024. And the one thing that people haven't realized or don't seem to realize is the cost to the economy of refurbishing Koeberg is enormous. Not just the cost of the actual refurbishment, but the cost of knowingly switching it off when we had an extra stage of load shedding. It runs into hundreds of billions of rand of damage to our economy. Now you can argue that's happened. So now we've spent all the money on Koeberg and we've damaged our macro economy. So now we should definitely carry on with that. Well, that's also false thinking, because the role of nuclear in the future energy system, not just of South Africa but globally, is essentially it gets in the way rather than assists. So nuclear is an impediment to what's happening to our energy system globally rather than something that helps.
And then your thoughts of the Energy and Electricity Minister, Hossein Seramagopa, says, well, South Africa will consider a new nuclear build somewhere on the south and the east coast of South Africa, and saying that it will be done at a cost and a means that South Africa can afford.
Well, I hate that expression, at a pace and scale that we can afford. And you creep along at this petty pace until the last syllable of recorded time. And the answer is that the role of nuclear in the future is it's actually awkward. So let me give you a couple of quick examples. In the near future, we're going to need 90 gigawatts of solar, 60 gigawatts of wind, and 40 gigawatts of storage. And then you add 2.5 gigawatts of nuclear sitting there. And then when you have to refuel half of that nuclear, you lose 1.25 gigawatts. And you have to cover for it. And guess what will cover for it? Wind, solar, and storage. And then when it comes back on again, it'll just occupy space. It gets in the way, because when the wind's blowing at night and the nuclear is chugging along, you have an oversupply. It's like a car that you park in your garage and it runs 24/7. We need more flexible generation in the form of storage and wind and solar, where it can flexibly be used. The notion of having something that runs 24/7, but even then, it's going to be such a small component. If you plot it on a sort of a graph, it's a thin red line on the bottom of the supply graph. It's a vanity project.
Clyde Mallinson, energy analyst, really appreciate your time.